You think a strip mall enlistment leads to battlefield glory, but you're completely blind to the machine waiting to strip your identity. You don't know the raw psychological cost of becoming an executioner. Welcome to Shadow POV, where we audit the systematic disassembly of human innocence. Part 1, the mall enlistment. You sign the papers at an office in a strip mall. The recruiter shakes your hand, smiling like you just won something. You don't know what you won yet. Welcome back to Shadow POV. You're 19, a former high school athlete who lifted weights in a cold garage and memorized every tactical film ever produced. You honestly believe you comprehend the weight of the document you just executed. You don't. Every high retention simulation across this digital landscape starts exactly like this, anchored in absolute innocence. This is level 1. It is a psychological baseline engineered to contrast against the upcoming friction of reality. The system requires unblemished minds as raw material. Why do our brains fall for this unassuming opening? Because it establishes a false security before stripping away your identity. By revealing that your fundamental understanding of this world is an illusion, a visceral curiosity is triggered. If this clinical dissection of human attention grips you, hit subscribe now. Your support fuels the deep analytical journeys we take into these hidden architectures. The recruiter's smile is the first deception. The text immediately forces an analytical mind to look over the edge of the abyss, creating an unresolved cognitive discrepancy. You must stay to watch the machine break him. We don't want the trauma ourselves. We want the precise data of the trauma. The short, staccato sentences deny you a pause to disengage. It is a structural trap, forcing you to ride the conveyor belt into the dark. Part 2, system voyeurism and the vicarious living bug. Once you cross that threshold, your civilian identity doesn't just fade. The system systematically disassembles it. You fly to Fort Benning for basic training, stepping off the bus into a wall of weaponized noise. They shave your head in the first hour, stripping away your vanity. They confiscate your civilian clothes and hand you a stiff, ill-fitting uniform. A drill sergeant stands mere inches from your face, his voice tearing through your eardrums to tell you that you are absolutely nothing. You believe him? Because under that psychological pressure, your old self dissolves. For 10 grueling weeks, your reality narrows down to 4 core mechanics. Run, shoot, march, and suffer. You learn how to hold a rifle, how to throw a grenade, and how to stay calm inside a gas chamber during a simulated chemical attack. You graduate, watching your mother cry at the ceremony, and you feel pride, but it only lasts for about an hour. What we are analyzing here is the deconstruction phase. Driven by systemic voyeurism, the data-driven mind of our audience craves this raw breakdown. You stay locked into the video because you need to map how a bureaucratic machine alters human psychology without facing the trauma yourself. The text strips away all cinematic glamour. It provides a cold, tactical look at human modification by examining the precise mechanics of this institutional stress test. The storytelling engages your inner analyst. You aren't just listening to a story. You are auditing an existential transformation. Part 3, the staccato mechanism. But the military machine doesn't let you savor pride. It immediately tests your newly modified psyche by throwing you against the laws of gravity. You report to airborne school for 3 weeks of jumping out of functional airplanes. Your first jump, you are so deeply terrified that your throat constricts and you almost can't breathe. The jump master shoves you out the open door into the void. You fall through 250 feet of cold, empty air before your parachute opens with a violent snap. You land hard against the dirt, surviving the impact, and you repeat this sequence 4 more times to earn your silver wings. You're still not a Green Beret, not even close. You're just a paratrooper now, an infantryman with metal pinned to his chest. Let's look at the mechanical architecture of this transition, through the lens of shadow POV. This sequence relies entirely on the staccato mechanism, a deliberate syntactic choice engineered to control human focus. Short, punchy sentences. The narrative strips away all decorative adjectives, forcing you into an unrelenting stream of kinetic action and sudden temporal shifts. By keeping the prose completely sparse, the pacing generates internal tension, denying your brain the cognitive pauses required to disengage from the content. The text doesn't tell you how to feel about the plunge. It simply drops you out of the aircraft and forces your mind to calculate the impact. This structural pacing mimics high adrenaline environments, starving you of pauses so you cannot click away. Part 4, Level 2 to 4, the gamification of human evolution. The silver wings pinned to your chest provide a fleeting illusion of achievement, but the path forward immediately demands that you cross an invisible line into a world where you do not even exist. You report to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, watching the men with the Green Berets walking around the base. They don't look at you. You have to earn the right to exist. You spend your first year in a regular infantry unit, cleaning rifles you will never fire in combat, standing in formations in the pouring rain, saving every dollar of your paycheck because the dream of wearing that beret consuming your mind. You write the request for Special Forces selection exactly 11 months into your enlistment. Your platoon sergeant warns you that 90% of guys like you wash out in the first week. He challenges you to prove him wrong, and you volunteer for Special Forces Assessment and Selection, known simply as SFAS. It is a 3-week psychological meat grinder engineered to break your spirit in ways you didn't know were possible. 400 elite candidates show up on day 1. Only 150 will survive to the end. You spend the entire first week executing brutal physical fitness tests under a suffocating cloud of uncertainty. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, timed runs, and a devastating 12-mile ruck march with 45 pounds of gear digging into your spine. The instructors never reveal the passing standards, and they never tell you if your performance is acceptable. They merely look at their clipboards and command you to show up the next morning. We are now dissecting the transition from level 1 to level 2, an evolution that relies entirely on the RPG reward trap to manipulate human focus. The data-driven mind of the shadow POV audience thrives on clear metrics, which is why this sequence is so effective. By intentionally withholding the standards, the narrative voice forces you to internalize the paralyzing paranoia of the candidate. You are caved into an invisible sieve. The narrative tension spikes because the grading criteria are completely hidden behind a cadre's clipboard. This structure plays with your analytical brain, compelling you to stay, to find out what it takes to survive a system with unannounced deadlines. Part 5, hyper-detailing and tradecraft credibility. When those rigid fitness test parameters vanish into total silence, the system truly begins to isolate your soul from the comfort of a predictable routine. You spend the second week navigating completely alone through the pitch-black pine forest of Camp McCall. Your entire universe shrivels down to a paper map, a magnetic compass, and a 65-pound rucksack cutting off the blood circulation to your hands. You possess a critical list of grid coordinates you must reach before a strict deadline. But that deadline is never announced. You walk 20 agonizing miles through black water swamps and unforgiving hills with zero sleep and no food breaks. You trip over hidden roots, fall face first into the mud, and force yourself up. You fall again, and you stand up again. The observing instructors don't offer a hand, and they don't even look you in the eye. They just write cold data points on their clipboards. Broken men quit every single day, walking up to the cadre to whisper the words, "I quit." A transport truck appears from the fog. The quitter climbs into the back, and it drives away in total silence. Nobody looks back. You adjust your heavy straps and keep walking. This psychological gauntlet shifts the storytelling focus from a physical test to an internal dissection of human isolation. The gritty realism of the endless swamp and the ghost-like truck represents the absolute unvarnished truth of endurance. By stripping away all structural lifelines, the system uncovers your pure essence. You aren't watching a standard Hollywood war film. You are calculating the precise psychological price of raw resilience. Part 6, Level 5 to 7, the escalation of stakes. Surviving the isolation of the endless swamp secures your place among the chosen. But the graduation ceremony signals the end of simple endurance and the beginning of a cold, systematic evolution. Week 3 of selection is Team Week, where they divide you into small groups and assign impossible tasks, like moving a heavy telephone pole across a mud field, carrying a dummy patient through deep swamps, or building a crude raft from raw barrels and frayed rope. The physical tasks are entirely irrelevant. The cadre are watching how you interact with total strangers under extreme fatigue. Do you lead, or do you passive follow? Do you complain, or do you quit? At the end of 3 brutal weeks, your name is read off a small paper list. You have been selected, but the true operational friction is just starting. You immediately report to the qualification course. The Q course, an 18-month pipeline engineered to turn a regular soldier into a lethal Green Beret. You begin with small unit tactics, mastering the art of moving through hostile terrain without leaving a physical signature. You learn to communicate silently with hand signals, how to orchestrate a perfect ambush, and how to survive when you are the one ambushed. You live in the dense field for weeks at a time, eating cold field rations and sleeping in the wet dirt without ever taking a shower. Then comes your military occupational specialty training. The machine assigns you a distinct specialty: weapon sergeant, engineer sergeant, medical sergeant, or communication sergeant. Each specialty has its own dedicated school, and each school is months long, possessing its own unique method of destroying your cognitive baseline. What we are witnessing here is the formal transition into the gamification of human evolution, where the narrative structure shifts from raw physical assessment to systematic tradecraft indoctrination. The data-driven mind of our audience stays locked into this progression because it acts as an intellectual reward matrix. By charting the exact parameters of the Q course, the hand signals, the cold rations, the specific MOS classifications, the storytelling establishes absolute credibility. You aren't merely observing an action sequence. You are watching a calculated blueprint of how a government apparatus re-engineers human behavior. Part 7, the illusion of the transparent shield. As you master the fundamentals of your chosen specialty, the system demands that you stop operating as an isolated tool and start weaponizing hyper-specific technical credibility. You become a weapon sergeant, an 18 Bravo, forcing your mind to absorb every firearm manufactured on Earth in the last century. American rifles, Russian Kalashnikovs, Chinese platforms, Belgian engineering. You learn to operate them in total darkness, disassemble them under stress, repair their broken pins, and teach hostile locals how to utilize them. You fire thousands of rounds until your shoulder bruises deep, black, and blue, and your ears ring with a permanent high-frequency hiss of tinnitus. Then comes language school, 6 months of absolute cognitive saturation, sitting 8 hours a day in a silent classroom, followed by 8 more hours of isolating homework. You forcefully memorize 5,000 distinct vocabulary words and adapt to an entirely new alphabet. You learn to read, write, and speak well enough to seamlessly navigate the Middle East. Most candidates suffer cognitive fatigue and fail out right here. But you pass. This phase establishes what Shadow, POV, defines as tradecraft credibility, through relentless hyper-detailing. If the narrative lazily utilizes generic terms like guns, your internal skepticism filter instantly flags the simulation as amateur fiction. By deploying explicit operational data, the bruising, the persistent tinnitus, the brutal 16-hour daily study loop, the text, bypasses your disbelief. We are analyzing how raw, technical precision transforms a simple script into a deeply authoritative reality. You aren't just skimming prose. Your brain is downloading the authentic, exhausting logistics of human modification. Part 8, Level 8 to 9, the Joint Operations Center, language proficiency and raw tactical technicalities only serve to delay the inevitable final test. An operational evaluation where you are dropped directly into the chaotic matrix of human manipulation. Then comes Robin Sage, the final grueling exercise that dictates whether you earn the right to wear the coveted green wool. For an entire exhausting month, you are dropped into the isolated woods of North Carolina, navigating a complex, simulated country called Pineland. Your mission is to establish a secure network, train, and forcefully lead a guerrilla force of local citizens against a hostile, oppressive government. These locals are played by realistic civilian volunteers who have been executing this specific counterinsurgency scenario for decades. They test your patience. They argue with your strategic decisions. They actively try to manipulate you into making critical operational errors. You eat the exact meager rations they eat, and you sleep in the freezing mud where they sleep. You teach them advanced small unit tactics, conducting realistic, simulated battles against opposing conventional forces playing the enemy. At the end of this month-long mental siege, you either pass or you fail. You pass. You return to Fort Bragg for a quiet ceremony. They place a Green Beret on your head. Your family is present. Your mother cries again. This time, your eyes well with tears. 2. But the beret is just a basic piece of wool. What it represents is the true weight. You swore a solemn oath when they handed it to you under the flag. De oppresso liber, to free the oppressed. The historical motto is Latin, but your mission from this moment forward is entirely global. Through the lens of Shadow POV, this sequence explores how high-level simulations pivot from raw physical stress to complex psychological manipulation. The data-driven mind of our audience remains locked into this progression because the parameters shift toward the unquantifiable variables of human behavior. By detailing the exact landscape of Pineland and the cold reality of the Latin oath, the text builds an unassailable authority. You are no longer just an observer tracking basic combat metrics. You are measuring the steep moral price of operational leadership. Part 9, Level 10, the Porch Epilogue. Once you secure your wings and embrace the weight of that global mission, the system shifts your reality away from simulated environments and drops you into the cold, unpredictable friction of an active combat theater. You report to an Operational Detachment Alpha, an ODA, a tightly knit 12-man team consisting of 2 officers and 10 highly specialized non-commissioned officers. Every man is an absolute expert in his field, yet trained to execute any other man's job in a sudden crisis. Your team deploys directly to Iraq. Your primary assignment is to train a local platoon of Iraqi soldiers so they can eventually assume full responsibility for their own country's security. That is the clean, unvarnished theory on paper. The tactical reality is infinitely more complicated. You spend your exhausting days at a dusty training compound outside Baghdad, teaching marksmanship, room clearing, basic first aid, and small unit tactics. These trainees are a volatile mix of everything. Eager young patriots, older veterans who survived 3 separate conventional conflicts, and quiet, unverified infiltrators working covertly for active insurgent groups. You cannot distinguish which is which. But the machine demands you train them anyway. Night falls, and the real work begins. Through the diagnostic lens of shadow POV, this structural escalation shifts the narrative stakes from internal personal endurance to the highly volatile, unquantifiable variables of an active deployment zone. The clean parameters of textbook training dissolve entirely, forcing your analytical mind to confront a system plagued by compromise and deep structural ambiguity. By detailing the exact blueprint of a 12-man ODA and the constant paranoia of unvouched local allies, the prose builds unassailable authority. You aren't just listening to a generic combat description. Your brain is auditing the exhausting, microscopic logistics of real-world systemic exposure. Part 10, the infinite loop. As night drops over Baghdad, your team and your local Iraqi counterparts initiate high-risk raids, pushing through the pitch-black rooms of target houses, where intelligence says insurgents are hiding. You kick in heavy doors, moving through dark spaces with tactical flashlights mounted to your rifles. You uncover weapon caches buried deep in dusty courtyards and active IED factories and abandoned warehouses. You also find terrified, completely innocent families. You softly apologize and immediately leave. Your very first kinetic firefight lasts exactly 30 seconds, but under adrenaline, it stretches to feel like 30 minutes. Your team leader takes a high-velocity round through his shoulder, and you forcefully drag him behind cover. You treat the severe bleeding with the exact medical training you absorbed back in the Q course, frantically calling for a medevac helicopter. He survives. This operational escalation introduces what Shadow POV analyzes as the psychological phenomenon of temporal distortion under life or death friction. The textbook theory completely shatters, forcing your mind to calculate tactical survival amidst absolute chaos. By detailing the exact weight of a 30-second firefight and the clinical application of medical tradecraft, the prose commands unassailable authority. You are no longer just tracing a structured progression. Your brain is downloading the raw, unfiltered cost of active human combat. Your deployment extends to 9 months, and the harsh reality of systemic compromise finally bleeds into your worldview. The local platoon you meticulously trained turns out to be only half loyal. 3 of them disappear into the night with their American-issued weapons, showing up a week later, fighting directly for the opposing side. Your team sergeant warned you this would happen, but your old self refused to believe him. Now you do. You spend Christmas eating smashed cookie crumbs inside a plywood hut, listening to mortars landing 3 kilometers away while telling your mother over a satellite phone that everything is completely fine. You are learning that fine is a word that means something entirely different now. This deep breakdown marks the final, crushing shift of this deployment, exposing the true deficit of navigating an unstable human system. Under the analytical lens of Shadow POV, this structural turn delivers a vital psychological lesson. You can master the raw technical tradecraft, but you can never fully control the volatile human variables inside the machine. In your current life, this teaches you to stop seeking flawless external certainty. Systems break, metrics shift, and people will fail your expectations. True operational resilience means building a solid internal baseline, adapting to sudden disruptions, and understanding that progress is often forged through calculated compromise rather than perfect outcomes. What is your personal view on managing expectations when a system or team fails you? Please politely share your thoughts in the comment section below so we can all learn from each other's perspectives. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support our upcoming deep dive content.